The night smelled of rain and smoke, as if the earth itself wept for what was about to be done. A low mist clung to the hedgerows, blurring the edges of the plague-scarred village of Hartwell until it seemed less a place than a dream gone grey. Church bells tolled a slow, uneven rhythm across the fields, heavy with dread. Empty cottages hunched beneath the pewter sky, doors daubed with ashen crosses where fever had stolen whole families. Wind carried the tang of rot from the marshes, mingling with the sour reek of old fires. Through this one world moved Eleanor Hart, her cloak patched but clean, the hem damp from evening dew. She had the calm, tireless air of one who had seen grief too many times to flinch. The plague had taken her husband in the winter, yet she walked each day from cottage to cottage with her satchel of herbs and quiet courage. Infants lived who would have died without her skill, old men found breath again after her teas of horehound and willow bark. Children clung to her skirts, their thin fingers sticky with honey lozenges she gave to soothe their throats. Mothers whispered thanks as she left, their candlelight catching the silver in her dark hair. But gratitude can curdle when fear is strong. Whispers followed her now where once there were blessings. A midwife who never fell ill, they murmured, must be favored by something unholy. Her Latin prayers, scraps of old church learning from her dead father, were said to be charms. Neighbors who had once broken bread with her now closed their shutters when she passed. Behind those doors, suspicion grew like mold on damp stone. The countryside itself seemed haunted. Fields lay fallow, weeds choking the furrows. Pigeons scattered from rooftops with frantic wings, as if they sensed a storm beyond weather. The river crawled low and black between its banks, carrying bits of straw in the memory of drowned rats. Each week brought another cart of the dead to the churchyard, the bodies wrapped in sheets still warm with fever. Magistrates rode from village to village, sniffing out signs of sin, eager to name a culprit the way a starving hound names a bone. When little Thomas Firth sickened and died despite every tincture Eleanor prepared, the quiet hatred found a voice. Widow Agnes, her eyes bright with envy of Eleanor's skill and the quiet respect she inspired, hissed in the priest's ear that the midwife kept a black cat that never aged, that she sang to the moon in a tongue no Christian should know. It was true Eleanor owned a cat, a drowsy grey mouser named Ash, but the story grew with each retelling until it prowled the village like a living thing. Rain fell in thin needles the night the rumor hardened. At the tavern hearth, men muttered of a devil's bargain. She walks dry when the rest of us drown, one said, his eyes bloodshot from drink. Her herbs bring fever as often as they cure it, added another. A third spat into the fire and swore he'd seen her shadow stretch across the meadow though the moon was gone. The words clung to the smoke and drifted upward into the rafters, blackening the air. By morning, the traveling witchfinder had arrived as if conjured by their need. Matthew Reddick cut a figure of grim authority, his black coat stiff with the damp, a leather Bible at his belt like a weapon. He spoke in a voice that carried beyond the square, promising God's favor and Parliament's reward to those who rooted out the servants of hell. His eyes were iron gray and cold enough to still a crowd. The villagers, desperate for an end to their terror, listened as though salvation itself rode behind him. Father Bellamy, the parish priest, resisted at first. He had known Eleanor since she was a girl who read scripture by the light of a rush candle. But Reddick pressed like a thumb to a bruise, speaking of the plague as judgment and the need for a visible sacrifice. One unrepentant soul can poison 100 faithful, he warned, his voice slicing the damp air. Bellamy's resolve, already softened by sleepless nights of burial prayers, wavered. That evening the church bells tolled not for the dead but for the living. Men gathered in the square, their torches hissing in the drizzle. Women peered from doorways, shawls clutched to their throats. Eleanor heard the commotion from her small cottage at the edge of the woods, where the scent of rosemary and thyme mingled with the faint smoke of her hearth. She looked up from grinding feverfew, sensing before she saw that the night had turned against her. Ash the cat leapt from the windowsill as the first fist pounded the door. A second blow followed, and a third, until the latch splintered. Lantern light flooded the room, throwing the shadows of the men long against the walls. Rain slicked their cloaks, dripping onto her clean-swept floor. Eleanor Hart, a voice barked, Reddick's, harsh and commanding. By order of the magistrate and for the safety of this parish, you are accused of witchcraft and consorting with the devil. You will come with us to answer these charges. She rose slowly, wiping her hands on her apron though her heart thudded like a drum. I have done nothing but tend the sick, she said, her voice steady despite the heat in her blood. If that is a crime, then the whole village shares my guilt. Silence, Reddick snapped. The devil's tongue is honeyed. Bind her. 2 men stepped forward, rough hands seizing her arms. The herbs spilled across the floor, their green scent sharp as a final protest. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of coughing from the fever wards and the low moan of the marsh. As they dragged her into the night, the village seemed to hold its breath. Shutters creaked as neighbors peered through slits of wood, faces pale in the lantern glow. A child whimpered until a mother hushed him with a hand over his mouth. From the far side of the square, the priest watched, his lips moving in a prayer he could not finish. Above them all, the sky pressed low and heavy, clouds bruised with storm. From the direction of the plague pits came a darker plume, smoke rising thick and unbroken, curling like a black ribbon toward the stars. It coiled across the moon, a silent omen. And in that wavering light, Eleanor Hart, healer of the sick and comforter of the dying, was led away, her shadow stretching behind her like a prophecy no one dared to name. Rain slicked the cobblestones as Eleanor was pushed through the courthouse door, the echo of boots and dripping cloaks filling the air like a dirge. Inside, the chill deepened. The walls sweated dampness, green with moss and streaked with centuries of mildew. Tallow candles sputtered in iron sconces, casting yellow light that trembled like frightened hearts. The smell of wet wool and unwashed bodies mingled with a sour undercurrent of fear so thick it clung to the tongue. Matthew Reddick stood at the center of the room, his black coat stiff with dried rain, eyes glinting with a cold light that seemed to draw every gaze. He carried no sword, only a worn Bible and a voice sharp enough to cut stone. "The devil's servant stands before you," he proclaimed, each word booming against the vaulted ceiling. "Eleanor Hart brings plague where she treads. She calls storms, she whispers to shadows. Tonight, the truth shall be known." Eleanor lifted her chin though her wrists were bound. Her breath left a faint cloud in the damp air, the only sign of the fear that beat beneath her ribs. Around her, villagers crowded the benches, faces she had once healed, hands she had once held through the agony of childbirth. Now those same faces would not meet her eyes. The magistrate, a gaunt man whose wig smelled of must and age, cleared his throat. "Proceed," he said, voice brittle as dry twigs. Reddick began with the swimming test. 2 men dragged Eleanor toward a great oak tub filled with river water gone black with silt. "A witch will float," Reddick intoned. "Water rejects the unholy." They forced her to her knees, ropes cutting her arms. She thought of the river's soft murmur in spring, how children once played along its banks. Now it glared up like a dark mirror. At Reddick's signal, they lowered her in. The water bit like winter. She sank instantly, lungs seizing, skirts dragging her down. Panic flared, she kicked for air, and the men hauled her out sputtering. The crowd gasped. "The devil aids her," Reddick cried, twisting the failure into proof. "She sinks because Satan drags her soul to the pit." Spectral evidence followed. A young girl of 12, eyes wide with a terror she barely understood, swore she had seen Eleanor's spirit standing at her bedside, whispering in a tongue of sparks. A farmer claimed that after Eleanor passed his field, his best cow miscarried. Widow Agnes, her rival in herbs and gossip, stood trembling as she described a night when Eleanor sang to the moon, her shadow, unnaturally long, as if it sought to touch the stars. The words, sharpened by envy, cut deeper than any blade. Through it all Eleanor remained silent until the magistrate demanded her defense. Her voice emerged hoarse from cold and sleeplessness but steady as a bell in frost. "If healing the sick be witchcraft," she said, the words ringing in the smoky air, "then may your own God judge me." The chamber stilled. Even the candles seemed to lean toward her, their flames straining for breath. Reddick's lip curled. "She mocks our holy office." He turned to the magistrate. "The devil lends courage to his brides." They deprived her of sleep, questioning her through the long hours when night and dawn were indistinguishable. Guards rattled chains beside her bench, their faces hidden in shadow. Hunger hollowed her belly until the stones beneath her seemed to sway. Yet each time they demanded a confession, she gave only silence or the quiet truth of her innocence. They pricked her skin with needles seeking the witch's mark, a patch that would not bleed. Every puncture welled red, and still they called it trickery. Outside the courthouse, England tore itself apart. Civil war raged between Crown and Parliament, villages like Hartwell crushed beneath the weight of armies and rumor. Reddick used that chaos like a torch. "This land rots because we harbor sinners," he thundered to the restless crowd. Only a pure sacrifice will cleanse the pestilence. His zeal was a fire looking for dry wood, and Eleanor's steadfastness only fed its hunger. One by one, those who might have spoken for her faltered. Father Bellamy, gray with guilt, sat hunched in the corner, his eyes on the floor. When the magistrate asked if he believed the woman godly, his reply was a whisper drowned by the scrape of quills. Reddick seized the silence, pressing the magistrate with the fervor of a man who smelled triumph. God demands action, he said, the words rolling like thunder. Show your people righteousness. Ink met parchment with a final scratch that seemed to echo like a scream. The magistrate's hand trembled as he signed, but he did not pause. By order of this court, he declared, voice cracking, Eleanor Hart is sentenced to death by fire on Midsummer's Eve, to cleanse this parish of pestilence and sin. A murmur rippled through the villagers, fear, relief, something darker. Some crossed themselves, others stared at the floor as though the stones might swallow them. A child began to sob until his mother pressed his head to her breast. The damp walls seemed to close in, the moss glistening like cold sweat. Guards led Eleanor past the benches. A few reached out as if to touch her, then drew back as though the air around her burned. She walked with a grace that shamed their cowardice, each step measured, her eyes bright in the candlelight. Reddick watched her go, a thin smile carving his face, already hungering for the spectacle to come. Outside, night pressed heavy over the square. The rain had ceased, leaving the cobbles slick and gleaming like black glass. Torches guttered in the breeze, their smoke twisting into the low clouds. The crowd spilled into the darkness, voices hushed, feet scuffing as if they feared to wake something beneath the earth. One by one they vanished into doorways, shutters drawn tight. Only the sound of Eleanor's footsteps remained, steady against the stone, until the courthouse door closed behind her with a hollow, final thud. The village seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere a dog barked and fell silent. The river beyond the fields whispered against its banks, carrying the echoes of a judgment that could not be undone.